Hello, everyone. Gonna give it just a minute here. I'm Benjamin Lindsay, managing editor at Backstage. If you are tuning in right now, you know that we are going live with actor Chris Meloni to discuss a few upcoming projects, to discuss his last season's performance on The Handmaid's Tale, and just to see how he's been holding up during this particularly extraordinary time in the industry. And then we'll wrap it up with a quick Backstage 5 Q&A. Should be a good one. Big fan of his, obviously, for years. So it should be good to pick his brain for a little bit. Thanks for joining us today. Hey there, Chris.
Hey,
How's it going today?
it's going tardy. How's it going with you?
It's going well. It's going well. No worries with tardiness. Appreciate you finding the time to chat today.
The pleasure's mine.
So you holding up okay during these pretty extraordinary times?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got nothing to complain about.
Good. Staying in good health. I like to see and hear that.
Yeah.
Well, we have a few things to touch on today. You have a lot of work coming up. First up is your series on Hulu coming out July 28th called Maxxx. You are playing talent manager Don Wild, and just based on the images that have come out of that series, it looks like he's quite the character. What can you tell us about that role, his positioning within the series, and how it all came together?
Well, it came together. I just got this script out of left field. They wanted me for this show, and it shoots in London. I said, okay, I'm intrigued. And then O.T. Fegbenley was the writer. He's the guy who plays Elizabeth Moss's husband on Handmaids. And yeah, it was great. We did a lot of tweaking. Everything was great on the page, but they just did a little massaging on the edges, and we came up with this great character, Don Wild. In his mind, record producer extraordinaire. And he's going to try and reboot OT's career back into the upper echelons of the music biz.
Right, the ex-boy bander.
Yeah, the ex-boy bander, exactly.
Went back. I love it. Now, did you first connect with OT on The Handmaid's Tale? I know you were in season 3.
Yeah, no, and I didn't. So I really didn't understand the serendipitedness of it all, because we hadn't met. But because I asked him, I said, "Why me?" And he said, "Well, your name came up, and it sounded like a good idea." So I didn't ask too many more questions.
I've had the opportunity to sit with him to discuss Handmaids, and love the way his mind works. He seems like quite the talent, certainly.
Yeah, and that was quite evident. You know, he wrote this, he produced it, he helped direct it, and he was just there every step of the way. He was very open to collaborating, which was very welcomed on my part. So it was a good experience.
Yeah. Well, to speak of the serendipitous nature of you two connecting, you did have a arc on season 3 of The Handmaid's Tale. Loved your character. Obviously, came to quite the climax with him at the end of season 3. What do you feel like playing him added to your acting arsenal, and just being in that atmosphere of The Handmaid's Tale?
Well, I'd always been a big fan of that show, and I think it is one of the most cinematically satisfying shows. I just find it very atmospheric. I enjoy how they allow the story to breathe, the characters' emotions to breathe. So I was really looking forward to being part of that storytelling. I found Winslow, Commander Winslow, that's my character. I found him cleanly written, but so I felt as though there was a lot of variability to coloring outside the lines as I saw fit. So, I felt I put some of those things in there. I thought it was a very interesting kind of insight into the power structure, because you always we're seeing this world through Elizabeth's eyes, and then the attendant players to her. But then, where my character came in was basically what's it like at the upper echelons, the Washington the federal level of power
Right.
of this dystopian world. And so I felt as though, they hadn't touched on that aspect of the story too deeply. So I was all in. I enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, yeah. We here at Backstage, our audience today is very much largely the working actors and creators of the world. As I'm sure you're familiar, when you were cutting your teeth in New York.
Oh yeah, Backstage, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I
Yeah.
think that you mentioned just these past two characters. You mentioned the way that they're written, and I'd love to hear a bit about just what your process is like for when you're handed a script. What are those steps you take to decide what the character is going to look like on screen?
That always comes from a variety of directions, which makes me happy because I think at the beginning of my career, I was very dogmatic in my approach. Like I was going to build this character, I was going to build it, as opposed to, okay, first of all, what are you feeling? How is just, it's more of an instinctual thing, but building from instinct, I guess, is the best way to define my approach. I mean, sometimes it'll just be a word in the action line of the writing. It'll be certain cadences that you hear. It'll be certain words that the character uses.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be certain, how the writer has written certain interactions. That I will see a strength or a foible, a weakness, sometimes I hear music. As a matter of fact, I very often, and that's kind of a later stage, more with the scenes, I constantly see or hear music. And it's kind of a rhythm, I'll go, this is a jazz, this is jazz. This scene is, kind of kinetic and moving and exploratory. And, it's kind of improvisational jazz, right?
Yeah.
I see it, I hear it. Sometimes it's just kind of classical. It's, it just brings, I don't know, a different feeling or flavor, at least in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this with Maxxx, as with Underground, the show I did Underground on the WGN, which was about the Underground Railroad, the costuming had an amazing impact. And Maxxx in particular was really extraordinary. The costumer was unbelievable. I mean, she brought all of the bangles that he wore around his neck, and I brought the wrist stuff, and I went out and bought earrings for my character.
Yeah. So we're the outside in a little bit.
Yeah. Oops. Hey, there you are.
No problem. Now, can you credit that at all to, I mean, going all the way back, I know that you trained with Meisner when you first moved to New York. Do you still find yourself pulling on that foundational training even after all these years?
Yes, because, I took some classes at the University of Colorado. That's what kind of got me that was my first dipping of the toe into the world of acting and theater. And when I left there, they gave me great training, but I also knew that I didn't know. I knew enough to know that I didn't know enough.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, what struck me in the Meisner was the repetition, the hammering home of moment to moment. And I just think that, to me, has been a cornerstone of when things don't feel right or they feel off. It's usually you're not going back to the very basics of the training of, listening and answering moment to moment. So it's not rocket science, but I think it is constantly honing or working or being cognizant of that muscle that needs to be engaged and paid attention to.
Yeah. And I love that you say you knew enough to know that you didn't know. So that's the first step to knowing that you got to do something about it. You got to take the reins.
Yeah, I was actually, I've said that and I've thought about that very often, and it's actually one of the prouder moments that I have about myself. That was the one time when I wasn't full of shit for myself that I was like, oh, good for you.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't humble pie. It was just being clear about your strong points and your weak points, and there were far more weak points.
Yeah, not bad, not bad. Now, how does something like that work into this upcoming return of Elliot Stabler? Obviously, a lot of people are excited for that. You're returning with Law and Order, Organized Crime. What are you most excited about revisiting?
You hear me breathe? Do you see me breathing?
Yeah, thinking on it.
It's more than that. It is. I'm. Ever since I signed on, I've been living. It's that thing of well, you don't need to get in character. You've already done the character, so you know the character. You're in character, and I'm like, no. If anything, this has been a far more difficult journey for me, because every day I think about not my 10-year, 9-year lag time from the SVU unit. I think of where's Elliot been emotionally, mentally, in his personal life, how he felt about his time with SVU, any grudges held, any, his memories, not my memories. And it's so, because they're not the same. They're just not the same thing. So I'm actually finding it very interesting journey that, I really can't articulate. I don't think. I'm just kind of. I'm trying to find Elliot on these beautiful summer days in the midst of all the turmoil that we're all being surrounded by.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you say, this is a different time for you to revisit Elliot. It's been a certain amount of time on the series in his own fictional life. He's also falling into a world that's pretty different when it comes to audience's relationship with the police.
Yep.
Do you feel like that's going to inform your take on him at all, or the series take on his profession at all?
On my part, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I always thought of Elliot as a flawed person, as most of us are, but who understood right. He understood truth.
Mm-hmm.
I always saw him at the end of the day. He was a good guy, and he was a forthright and honest man. So, I will do my best to bring that to the fore. And as far as the storytelling goes, I think, if we do it right, we will. You have to acknowledge the moment, and you have to acknowledge how that it impacts all types of individuals, institutions. So, yeah, I fully expect us to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm happy hearing that it's not falling into a vacuum, to say the least. It's falling into a world that it's aware of the world that it's falling into, is what I mean.
Yeah, and I just think that's good storytelling. I think that's, it's, a more meaningful engagement with the moment and the storytelling. So, yeah.
Not bad, not bad. Well, before we wrap up here, I like to end all our interviews with the Backstage 5 questionnaire. It's a bit of a walk down memory lane, rapid fire, or take your time, whatever you
Rapid fire, okay.
Question 1 is, how did you first get your SAG-AFTRA card?
So I got the role of an assassin. I was leader of an assassination squad for The Equalizer,
Mhm.
Jonathan Edwards, and my lines were, so we break into this office, we bust out of a van, break down into this office, and we see all of these security guards, and they're dead.
Mhm.
And I say, it looks like somebody did our job for us. And my second in command goes, what do you want me to do? And I say, burn him, because he just happens to have a flamethrower,
Okay.
like all assassination
Yeah.
squads do. And so I went to costuming, and they fitted me out. They gave me like a knit cap and everything in black and all that. I was dressed in black, really cool. But the knit cap went down over my face.
Okay.
And it wasn't even like with the mouth. It was just my two eyes.
Right. Okay.
So that was it. So you wouldn't be able to tell it was me. So I shot it. And on the night of they dubbed my voice on top of that. So that's how I got my SAG
All right.
card.
All right. And how long between moving to New York to pursue the dream and actually starting to book work was that? Did you have a period of years where it was part of the struggle of the working actor?
Well, my God, it felt like it. I arrived in '84. I didn't get a paying. I got my first commercial in late '86. Yeah, November of '86. So it was about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
It felt like a lifetime. It really felt like a decade. But that was my first commercial. And maybe, I booked another one, maybe the next year around January, February. And then for 2 years, I actually booked a lot of commercials. But '89 was the first for reals job I got on HBO's First and 10.
Not bad. Not bad. Yeah, you got to hit that pavement early on for sure. I'm sure Backstage came in handy, or at least.
Oh my God, I slept with it, man. I slept with any resource. I was in there. One time I bumped into a friend of mine. I just saw him, walking down the street. I said, "What are you up to?" He goes, "Well, I saw an announcement for an audition in Backstage." I went, "Great. Can I go?" And so I went with him. And it was a musical.
Not bad. Not bad.
Yeah. Until they asked me if I minded singing a cappella. I said, not at all, if you don't mind telling me what a cappella means.
Right. Not at all if you don't mind me being off pitch. Not bad. What is the wildest thing you've ever done to get a role? Have you ever gone above and beyond to get your name out there front and center?
Well, yeah, I mean, I peed in a bucket in solitary confinement on Oz. You mean during the audition?
Either or, yeah.
Well, I think the things on Oz, let me just say this. I think that's the one show my mother never watched.
Enough said. Enough said on that, yes.
Yeah.
Also during that time, do you have an audition horror story that you could share with us today?
Well, I remember, yeah, I mean, there are too many to enumerate, but one time I did well, God, there's so many, man. Oh my God, they're all so bad. One time I was auditioning, this was a screen test for As the World Turns, and I was kind of fresh out of acting school. And so they paired us up against people who were already on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the scenes was kind of a seduction scene with the girl, and she was a regular on the show. And I grabbed her and I kissed her, and I gave her tongue, only because and I pulled away, and she gave me the hollow mouth, and she pulled away with the death stare, and I was like, oh man, I was thinking to myself, I screwed up. I really, but when you're young and your method or whatever,
You think you're going for it?
that's all. But she was like, please, dude, I mean, what is she gonna do? Make out with every dude there are like 4 of us. I mean, I'm embarrassed recounting that story.
Lesson learned. Lesson learned.
Yeah.
Sure, it only happened once, and then never again.
Or I can tell you the one that I auditioned for a play and I wasn't used to the stage and from whence you have to project. And again, I was testing with a girl who was already in the production. So she knew her lines cold. So she was like, and I just couldn't keep up. And I was doing the scene like this, like, we need to talk about this. And like halfway through in the darkened, empty theater, the guy goes, "We're out here and we can't hear you."
Also, lesson learned.
Lesson learned. Project.
Not bad.
Don't give tongue and project.
Perfect. I did want to ask you, especially during this time of quarantine, voiceover work and remote work in particular have been definitely on the up. Kind of the new norm when it comes to animation. You have recent credits on Harley Quinn and on Rick and Morty, among others throughout your career. Do you have any tips for how to deliver a great voiceover performance versus live action?
I have no tips for that because I still want to be hired more than I am, and I just can't seem to get hired. So I'm not the guy. I'll tell you what, I did work on Harley Quinn. I worked with the legend behind SpongeBob, the voice of SpongeBob.
Oh, excellent.
And that dude like works all the time. And so experiencing him was like being in the recording booth with Mel Blanc. So that's my only story, but I have no advice.
Not bad. That's
Ask
fine.
him.
Yeah. Well, final question for you then. Again, kind of thinking about these early days in your career, do you have any advice that you give your younger self?
Well, I'll say this. I'm proud of my younger self for understanding and knowing that constantly doing something was not idle spinning of wheels or wasting of time. If you can, you take the voice class, you continue with the acting class. You're constantly in training. You're constantly keeping open to the possibilities. I would say to myself, don't stress out so much. But I always felt like that was kind of that's my nature, and that was always my fuel. I felt for me, but in retrospect, I realized, man, that's an awful lot of stress, bro. You can still do what you need to do. You just got to take care of business, keep breathing, hope for the best.
Do what you got to do. Awesome.
Do what you got to do.
I'm happy to see that you're doing well today. Thank you for your time. Congrats on all the continued work, and can't wait to see Maxxx and the upcoming Law and Order.
Thank you.
So stay well out there and appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much. Sorry I was late.
No problem. Have a good one.
Bye.